Before the headlines, before the theories, before the nation started arguing about what it all meant, there was a father standing in a cold hospital corridor, staring at a closed door, behind which lay the body of his only son. They say grief has a sound. Sometimes it's a scream, sometimes it's silence, but that night, it was a single cry that made even the officers in the hallway look away. Charlie Kirk, a voice that had once commanded stages, rallies, and campuses, now gone in a moment that felt too planned to be random, too public to be forgotten. Please, before we continue, never forget to drop your contribution. Please and please drop your comment. As you listening to this new updates, we would definitely respond to all comment. We will be glad to hear your feedbacks on this report. We stand for truth. We stand for Charlie. The news called it political. The court calls it criminal. But for his father, it's personal. Because what happened in that Utah auditorium wasn't just an assassination. It was a breakdown of everything we're supposed to trust: security, accountability, humanity. And when the cameras turned away, that's when the real story began. The story of a man who didn't want revenge. He wanted answers. This is the story of Charlie Kirk's father, and the cry that shook a courtroom. What do you think? Is the case moving forward carefully, or is progress being slowed by procedural delays? Share your thoughts in the comments below. That's where we hear your thought, 'cause we will definitely respond to all comment. And also, make sure you comment where you're watching from. To stay updated on every development, subscribe now. Turn on notifications and also don't hesitate to support this movement so you stay informed as new update becomes available. This is Detective Max, and together, we fight for justice. Security officers lowered their heads. Reporters stopped typing, even those who didn't know him paused. Because in that moment, pain didn't need a microphone. It spoke through the shaking of his father's hands, through the disbelief etched into his mother's face, through the emptiness that filled the space where applause used to be. The crowd had come expecting words, ideas, debates, inspiration. But what they witnessed instead was the human cost of a world that's forgotten how sacred life truly is. Cameras caught the aftermath, not the ache. They showed the chaos, not the cost. They showed the tragedy, but never the father who whispered, "That's my boy. That's my boy." And maybe that's what makes this story different. Because beyond the noise, beyond the politics, there was a father who didn't lose a symbol. He lost his son. They called him ordinary, a face you could pass on the street and never notice. But hidden behind that ordinary face were pages of words that no one wanted to believe were real. Neighbors describe him as quiet. Teachers remember him as polite. But online, a different picture existed. One built from anger, isolation, and hours spent feeding on division. Somewhere in that spiral, something broke. And when it did, a man became a weapon. Investigators later revealed fragments of digital footprints, comments, coded phrases, even a message sent just hours before the event. A message that read, "They'll remember today." But remember for what? For taking a life that sparked debate instead of change? For proving that silence toward warning signs always costs someone their tomorrow? Because this wasn't just one man's decision. It was a chain of failures. Systems that saw red flags but filed them away. People who noticed odd behavior but stayed quiet. Platforms that allowed rage to grow until it found a target. And when the dust settled, all that was left was a father asking the question no detective can ever fully answer. Why did no one stop him before he stopped my son? They said time would help, that the pain would ease once the cameras left, once the trial began, once headlines found someone else to chase. But time hasn't helped, because time doesn't heal what truth hasn't touched. He visits the site sometimes, quietly without attention. The stage is gone now. The banner's packed away, but he still stands in the same spot where his son took his last breath. He kneels, runs his hand across the floor and whispers words no one else can hear. There's a photo he carries, one from years ago. A young Charlie standing beside him, holding a small microphone at a school talent show. He said that's where it all began. That spark, that passion, that drive to speak light into dark places. And now, that same father wonders how a world his son tried to reach became the one that took him away. He doesn't ask for pity. He asks for accountability, not from strangers, but from the silence that followed, from the institutions that promised protection but delivered paperwork, from a culture that moved on before the truth was even clear. Because behind every headline that trends for a day, there's a family that will grieve for a lifetime. And for a father who once believed justice would bring peace, peace now feels like a distant country he may never visit. They call it procedure, a list of steps, policies, and formalities meant to protect. But sometimes, those steps come too late. Somewhere in the evidence room, there's a file marked with Charlie's name. Inside it, timestamps, camera angles, audio fragments. Each one a frozen moment of a tragedy that shouldn't have happened. But as investigators retrace those moments, inconsistencies start to appear. One witness remembers a suspicious figure pacing the back hallway. Another insists they saw a security officer radio for assistance, but no one came. And yet, those statements never matched on paper. A nearby student claimed the metal detectors beeped twice before the suspect walked through. Still, no one stopped him. Was it a glitch or a moment dismissed as nothing? Either way, that nothing became everything. The question now isn't whether evidence exists, it's why it took so long to surface. Footage time-stamped minutes before the attack sat in a system queue, waiting for approval. By the time it was reviewed, the headlines had already written their version of the truth. Negligence rarely announces itself loudly. It hides in overlooked emails, in the tired shrug of a guard who assumes someone else will handle it. And while agencies promise full cooperation, one father sits in silence, wondering if his son's life might have been spared by just one person paying closer attention. Because justice doesn't only demand punishment, it demands responsibility. And in cases like this, responsibility is often the first thing people are afraid to claim. They call it procedure. A list of steps, policies, and formalities meant to protect. But sometimes those steps come too late. Somewhere in the evidence room, there's a file marked with Charlie's name. Inside it, timestamps, camera angles, audio fragments, each one a frozen moment of a tragedy that shouldn't have happened. But as investigators retrace those moments, inconsistencies start to appear. One witness remembers a suspicious figure pacing the back hallway. Another insists they saw a security officer radio for assistance, but no one came. And yet, those statements never matched on paper. A nearby student claimed the metal detectors beeped twice before the suspect walked through. Still, no one stopped him. Was it a glitch or a moment dismissed as nothing? Either way, that nothing became everything. The question now isn't whether evidence exists, it's why it took so long to surface. Footage time-stamped minutes before the attack sat in a system queue, waiting for approval. By the time it was reviewed, the headlines had already written their version of the truth. Negligence rarely announces itself loudly. It hides in overlooked emails, in the tired shrug of a guard who assumes someone else will handle it. And while agencies promise full cooperation, one father sits in silence, wondering if his son's life might have been spared by just one person paying closer attention. Because justice doesn't only demand punishment, it demands responsibility. And in cases like this, responsibility is often the first thing people are afraid to claim. They call it the price of due process. Court filings, expert witnesses, security, logistics. A figure so large that news outlets headline it like a statistic, not a story. But for the Kirk family, justice has never been about the balance sheet. It's about the moments they relive every time that courtroom door opens. The sight of the accused sitting just feet away. The sound of attorneys arguing over technicalities while their son's name becomes evidence instead of memory. Every postponed hearing feels like another denial of peace. Every procedural motion, another reminder that grief must wait its turn behind the paperwork. Officials debate cost efficiency. Analysts discuss taxpayer burdens. But what about the emotional debt, the one that can't be repaid? Because while the system counts its dollars, a father counts the days since he last heard his son's voice. And that's a cost no government budget will ever record. He doesn't ask for special treatment, he asks for sincerity, for truth delivered without politics, for justice without performance. For once, he says, I just want them to mean what they say. And in a world where statements come easy and accountability comes slow, those words echo louder than any verdict ever could. When the courtroom empties and the chatter fades, there's always a moment of stillness. It's the kind of silence that makes even the walls feel heavy. A silence filled not with peace, but with what's missing. In that silence, Charlie Kirk's father often stays behind. He doesn't speak to the press. He doesn't look for cameras. He just stands there, staring at the seat where his son should have been. Witnesses say the first time he spoke after the verdict delay, his voice cracked. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He simply said, I hope they remember who he was, not what happened to him. Those words stayed with everyone who heard them, because in a world that thrives on spectacle, that plea was pure. A reminder that tragedy should never be entertainment, and justice should never be delayed by bureaucracy. Outside the courthouse, flowers wilt under the autumn sun. Notes left by strangers fade, but the pain behind them doesn't. People walk by, some stopping for a photo, others moving on. But for the Kirk family, there is no moving on. There is only moving through. And somewhere, far from the noise, a father still wakes up before dawn, sits by the window, and whispers a prayer into the dark. A prayer for truth, a prayer for strength, a prayer that no other parent will ever have to cry the way he did. Because long after headlines disappear and politics shift, that cry, quiet, human, and unfiltered, will keep echoing across every place that promised safety and delivered sorrow. And maybe that's what the world needs to hear again. Not the arguments, not the spin, but the sound of a father's pain, reminding us that behind every case, every name, there is a heart that broke and never fully healed. Every investigation ends on paper. Reports get stamped, cases get filed away. But for the ones left behind, questions don't end, they multiply. Did someone ignore the signs? Was there a moment when all of this could have been stopped? And if so, Why wasn't it? Those are the questions that follow Charlie Kirk's family home every night. They don't fade with time, they deepen with silence. Because somewhere between the statements, the footage, and the legal arguments, something still feels missing. Something human. It's the acknowledgement that beyond the politics, beyond the talking points, a father's heartbreak is not partisan. A mother's tears are not ideological. They're universal, and they demand to be seen. But here's the part no one wants to admit. For every case like this one, there are others that never make it to the spotlight. Other families sitting in living rooms that feel too quiet, holding on to photos that now feel heavier than words. The difference is, this one had cameras. But grief doesn't need cameras to be real. It just needs truth. And truth still hasn't spoken loud enough. Some say justice is blind, but lately it feels deaf too. Deaf to the cries of parents who never stop waiting. Deaf to the silence left in the spaces their children used to fill. Charlie Kirk's father never asked for revenge. He asked for truth. A truth that doesn't hide behind politics, headlines, or the comfort of distance. But truth is slow when power is loud. And that's the tragedy most people forget. It's not just that a life was lost. It's that a system built to protect couldn't keep its promise when it mattered most. So tonight, as the world scrolls past another story, someone's father is still at a gravesite, whispering words that never make it into reports. And someone's mother still sets a plate at the table just to remember how it used to feel, to have everyone home. Justice will write its conclusion, but pain writes its own. Until the system learns to feel, justice will remain half done.